I got
Okay,
I got it.
okay, you can do that. We do have a few people that are not on yet, and if they don't come, then at least we can have this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Okay.
thank you, Anna, for inviting me. And I have dealt with some of these people I'm going to be talking about. That is an interview I did with Tom Flores back in 1997, who is now in Pro Football's Hall of Fame. He was uh, pioneer player, but more so pioneer coach. He won a couple Super Bowls, and his quarterback was Jim Plunkett, who I dealt with once or twice. Don't have a picture with him, but I dealt with him. And some other famous football players, Hispanic football players, included Tom Fears, who was a great player for Los Angeles back in the 1950s. Pele is still considered the top soccer player of all time, and introduced soccer on at least a massive level in the United States, although it was played in the United States before Pele played with the New York Cosmos back in the mid 1970s. Lionel Messi is the big star today. In fact, last night his Miami team played in Los Angeles, and they got a sold out crowd of 27,000 people there coming basically to see him play. Roberto Clemente, my favorite story about Roberto Clemente was he was supposed to be in the Odd Couple movie back in 1968. The Mets playing Pittsburgh, and Oscar Madison, of course, is covering the game for the New York Herald. And Roberto Clemente was supposed to hit into a triple play. He kind of read the script or kind of figured out he wasn't getting paid much money, so he didn't do it. Bill Mazeroski did instead, but he was supposed to be in the movie The Odd Couple. Jose Altuve is the 5'7", 5'6" superstar with the Houston Astros today. And there was one once it was called for Fernando Mania in Los Angeles in the early 1980s. I remember covering a Mets Dodgers game in the early 1980s, and this guy was a star, an international star, and he had media following him and all of that. So he was a big deal back in the early 80s. Julio Cesar Chavez was a great fighter. Guillermo Villas, a great tennis player. Mario Bruno is not even recognized today, but she became before Billie Jean King, and she was a great, great tennis player. The Merry Mex, Lee Trevino, he was a major golfer in the 1960s and 70s, and got struck by lightning a couple times, and joked about it. I don't know if I would do the same thing. Nancy Lopez, she was golf's greatest player, 1977, 78. Carmelo Anthony, one of the great scorers in National Basketball Association history, played with the New York Knicks. And Pau Gasol, who played in the NBA from Spain. And more Hispanic stars, Rebecca Lobo, who is one of the greatest women's players of all time in basketball. And Dana Torres, who was in her 40s, and she was still winning medals at the Olympics while she was performing in her 40s. But let's get back to Tom Flores. And I knew Tom, interviewed him quite a few times when he was the Seattle Seahawks coach. I was up in Seattle in his office one day, and we just sat back and just basically tossed the ball. He started with the Oakland Raiders back in 1960. For those of you who are football fans, you might remember Darryl LaMonica, the Mad Bomber with Oakland. Well, Al Davis traded Tom Flores to Buffalo to get Darryl LaMonica. And Al told Tom, "You're always going to be a Raider." And he ended up being traded. He would come back. He would be a coach with the Raiders. He would also be with Seattle, and he would also be a Raiders radio announcer. And I got to know him over the years. In 2021, Tom Flores was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. 1960, the first year of the American Football League, Tom Flores became the first Latino starting quarterback in professional football or Major League Football. The American Football League is considered a major league. He started 13 games for the Oakland Raiders. He also played for Buffalo and Kansas City. He served as an assistant coach for the Oakland Raiders for 7 seasons. He became the head coach in 1979, not the first Latino head coach. That was Tom Fears. I'll get into Tom in a little bit. He would lead the Raiders to a Super Bowl title in his second season at the helm in 1980 and 27-10 victory over the Philadelphia Eagles in Super Bowl 25. That team would become the first wild card to win the Super Bowl, and it should be Super Bowl 15. I obviously don't know my Roman numerals, but that was the year of Super Bowl 15, and I better brush up on my Roman numerals. He won the second Super Bowl championship with the Los Angeles Raiders after Al Davis moved his team from Oakland to Los Angeles. This was 38-9 victory over the Washington Redskins, and I'll get that one right. I know X is 10, V is 5, and I is 3. Add them all together, and that's 18. I got that in 1983. At the time, his 2 Super Bowl coaching victories ranked only behind Chuck Noll, who was with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is a Hispanic football trailblazer and a really nice guy, too, to boot. He was the first minority coach to win the Super Bowl. He was also the first Latino quarterback in pro football history. He was the first minority general manager with the Seattle Seahawks in 1989. In July 2011, Flores received the Roberto Clemente Award for Sports Excellence that is given by the National Council of La Raza for contributions in society by a Hispanic athlete and I guess executive as well. And there he is with Jim Plunkett, who was his quarterback for one of the Super Bowl winning teams. And Jim Plunkett was a great player at Stanford University, ended up with the New England Patriots and fizzled out, and his career was revitalized by Tom Flores. He is of Mexican descent. He was the first minority quarterback to win a Super Bowl, remains the only Hispanic to be named a Super Bowl MVP. His story has been very well documented. He was the number 1 pick in the 1971 NFL draft by the New England Patriots out of Stanford. He won the Heisman Trophy. After 5 seasons with New England, he spent 2 years with San Francisco, started 26 games, but he was considered a has-been by that point, and he joins the Oakland Raiders in 1978. He's Kenny Stabler's backup. The Raiders traded for Dan Pastorini in 1980. They gave up Snake Stabler. And, well, they figured old Dante and his playboy ways, which he doesn't have anymore. He's settled down, but he was a wild guy back in the day. Anyway, they figured, well, Dan's going to be the starting quarterback, and Jim, well, you'll be holding the clipboard on the bench. We may need you, but be prepared, but maybe not. But Plunkett had decided, I may not want to do this. I may not want to be the backup quarterback. Why would I want to be the backup quarterback? I've been starting. But Flores talked him out of it. He said, come here. You may get a chance. Come here. Take the chance. You're getting paid. What are you going to get paid? Doing nothing at home. Take the paycheck. Well, he does get his chance. He's the starting quarterback in week 5 because Dan Pastorini broke his leg. And the Los Angeles Raiders went on to become the first wild card team to win the Super Bowl, and Plunkett was the MVP. And he led the Raiders to the Super Bowl 18 title after the 1983 season. And there is Tom Fears. Talked about Tom Fears. He was the coach of the New Orleans Saints, but he was a wide receiver with the the Raiders, with the Los Angeles Rams. He became the first Latino head coach in NFL history when he was hired by the New Orleans Saints in 1967. He was the son of a Mexican mother and a father who worked in Mexico but was a U.S. citizen. The Fears family moved to Los Angeles when he was 6. He was a great college football player at the University of California, Los Angeles, and he signs a contract with the Los Angeles Rams in 1947. He caught a then National Football League record 77 passes, 1,013 yards, just 12 games in 1949. And the next year, he broke that record, catching 84 passes with 1,116 yards in 1950. And there he is. He is the coach of the New Orleans Saints, the first coach of the New Orleans Saints, that team coming into existence on All Saints Day, 1966, as per Congress, because New Orleans had to get a team to satisfy congressional needs to allow the merger between the American Football League and National Football League and create the Super Bowl. So he's the first coach of that team that was used as a political pawn in Congress, and the National Football League traded that franchise to Congress, literally, in exchange for about 40 votes, and that created the merger, and that created the Super Bowl. Anyway, first Latino and Mexican-born player ever to be inducted into the NFL. Rather, it's the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It's not the NFL Hall of Fame. He lasted 3 seasons with the Saints. 1 year away from the sidelines, he returned to serve as the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles in 1972. That lasted a year. And then the new league that had no money, the World Football League's Southern California Sun in 1974, and I hope he got all his paychecks. Now, the question about Tom Fears, was he blacklisted from the National Football League because of this movie and the book by Peter Gent called North Dallas 40, which talked about the shady side of football, the injuries, the parties, everything else, the stuff that the owners did not want you to see. And he's a technical advisor on this film. He lived in Los Angeles. He had a connection to Hollywood, and he was the technical advisor for films. It was in that role on the movie North Dallas 40 that Fears drew the ire of the National Football League, which was not a fan of the film. That revealed the tawdry side of the game and its players. The movie was based on a book written by one-time Dallas Cowboys player Peter Gent. Fears never worked in the league again and claimed he was blacklisted, although it's hard to prove it, and he never filed suit saying that he was discriminated against. Pele may still be the greatest soccer player who ever lived. He came to New York after the prime of his career and helped sell soccer to an American audience. Edson Arantes de Nascimento was born on October 23rd, 1940. He was named after Thomas Edison, believe it or not, Thomas Edison, except on the birth certificate, the I was dropped. He's regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, soccer player of all time. He began his football or soccer career with the Santos Football Club in eastern Brazil at the age of 15, went on to win 3 World Cup medals in a career that spanned nearly 2 decades. And there he is in some World Cup action. The guy behind him looks like he's about 45. And Pele looks like a kid, but that's the 1958 World Cup, and I guess he was a kid. He was a teenager. Pele made his international debut in 1957 at the age of 16. The following year, played his first game in the World Cup finals in Sweden. The Brazilian manager initially was hesitant to play his young star. When Pele finally reached the field, he made an immediate impact. He rattled the post with 1 shot. He collected an assist. Had a hat trick, 3 goals in the semifinal game against France and 2 goals in the championship game. Brazil defeated Sweden 5-2, and he had already made his mark as a 17-year-old. He was a national treasure in Brazil. And unlike sports figures who you might consider a national treasure in the United States, being a national treasure in Brazil meant you were tied to Brazil. Pele combined kicking power with accuracy, with a remarkable ability to anticipate other players' moves. 3 years after the 1958 World Cup, Pele was declared a national treasure by the Brazilian government in order to ward off large offers from European clubs and ensure he would remain in Brazil. He had like one of those movie contracts that starlets used to have, that you were tied to the movie studio for 7 years, and then you could go. This guy's tied to his country. They won't let him go. You're going to play for us. You're going to be here. You're not going to make more money in Europe. And there he is with the scissors cut. Pele, it looks like it's gravity defying. The backwards bicycle kick. Pele performed this maneuver during a 1968 match between Brazil and Belgium, and its popularity took off. The bicycle kick is not easy to do. I scored 1,283 goals, and only 2 or 3 were bicycle kicks. Pele wrote in his book, Why Soccer Matters. Coming to America, see, he really didn't want to come to America. He was happy in fact, he was happy that he wasn't playing or wasn't going to play. But, money talks, and when you need some money, you go get that money, and that's why he came to America. His football career was done in 1974, and he wanted to lead a quiet, simple life in Brazil. Like, he could? No, that wasn't going to be possible. But he was going to do it with his wife and 2 sons. But he has to rethink his retirement plans, as he recalled in his biography, Pele, Importance of Football, published in 2013. He described the moment when he received a surprise visit from his accountant, and it wasn't Merry Christmas or how you doing or, hey, let's go out and have some drinks and have some fun. Nope, not at all. I remember the moment he entered the house as if it was yesterday. He was sweating profusely. He was pale. He looked like he was about to faint. I could tell something was wrong, so I made a little joke. How many million have we still got? I had nearly to call the doctor when he replied, look, this is difficult. Pele was broke, on the brink of bankruptcy. He lost practically every single one of his 41 properties he invested in. They were seized by banks after a series of ill-advised investments by at least 6 companies that had been badly run and building up debt since the end of the 1960s. Pele was 33. He was broke. Is this the last game he ever played in Brazil? No, he was broke. Pele was in Brussels with several international stars for a friendly match. He ran into the North American Soccer Leagues. New York Cosmos general manager Clive Toy in the lobby at the GB Motor Inn Hotel. They talked. The New York Cosmos franchise, it was owned by Warner Brothers at that time, or whatever incarnation Warner Brothers was at that time. Today it's Warner Brothers Discovery. The New York Cosmos franchise offered him a contract for $2.8 million. Took the deal, needed the money. So he's coming to America. He's going to be playing in some rundown 2-bit places like on Randall's Island, in that old rat-infested stadium, Downing Stadium. Though he was past his prime at this point, Pele was credited with significantly increasing public awareness and interest of the sport in the United States. He entered the field to play his first game with the Cosmos on June 15th, 1975, against the Dallas Tornado at the old and small and rat-infested, cockroach-filled Downing Stadium on Randall's Island, scoring a goal in a 2-2 draw. But Pele's a big star, right? Even though he's past his prime, and there he is with Mick Jagger, partying with Mick Jagger, no doubt heading over to Studio 54 at some point. On the road, the Cosmos and Pele sold out every game. It was like traveling with the Rolling Stones, said the club's traveling secretary, Steve Marshall. In New York, they were media darlings, idols of 77,000 fans who crowded into the Meadowlands, including Jagger and Henry Kissinger and Robert Redford, Steven Spielberg. I was going out with a woman at that time who lived in Hackensack, and her father, she took me to meet her father, who lived in a penthouse, one of these places in Hackensack. He said, let's go see the Cosmos next Wednesday night. I got a box, or whatever he got. And I said, no, I'm actually working. I'd love to do it, but I can't. The Cosmos were partying at Studio 54. In 2 years, they became an organization with cultural visibility no other arm of the Warner portfolio could boost. But they were losing money. and they were losing a lot of money. They never made any money in 15 years. Cosmos, that team was the hottest ticket of town, but Warner Brothers was not making money on them. Oh, a football player meets a soccer player. That is Gerald Ford, President of the United States, 74 through 1976, on the left, kicking a soccer ball. He's a member of the College Football Hall of Fame. He was an offensive lineman at the University of Michigan, and he's showing his skills there, kicking the football with Pele kind of laughing and other members of the New York Cosmos team there. Pele led the Cosmos to the 1977 Soccer Bowl in his third and final season with the club. In June 1977, the Cosmos attracted an NASL, North American Soccer League, record 62,394 fans to Giants Stadium for a 3-0 victory past the Tampa Bay Rowdies, with a 37-year-old Pele scoring a hat trick. In the quarterfinals, 77,891 turned out for a Cosmos Fort Lauderdale Strikers game at Giants Stadium. Pele officially ended his career on August 28, 1977, leading the New York Cosmos to their second Soccer Bowl title, 2-1 victory over the Seattle Sounders at the Civic Stadium in Portland, Oregon, which is, I think, still there because they haven't replaced it with anything else. Coming to America, there is Pele, there is the soccer trophy. He finished that career on August 28th, and that was that. Here he is getting a send-off at the Meadowlands. October 1st, 1997, Pele closed out his career in an exhibition match between the Cosmos and Santos, his old team. Match played in front of a sold-out crowd at Giants Stadium, televised in the U.S. on ABC's Wide World of Sports with Jim McCain, Jim McManus, Howard Cosell's nemesis over at ABC. I guess they were kind of friendly. I knew Cosell well, know his grandkids rather well, still friends with them. And Howard and I had a relationship. Almost ended up with my wife singing at a fundraiser he was holding until he was thrown out of the fundraiser as a fundraiser. Hey, God, forget about it. They don't want me. They don't need her, even though she could warble a little bit. My old acquaintance, Howard Cosell. Anyway, Lionel Messi is the Pele of his day, which is 2024. He's about 37 years old. He's probably the best known soccer or football player in the world. Messi has been named the world's best men's player or the best men's player of the year 7 times, 2009 through 12, 2015, 2019, 2021. In 2022, he helped Argentina win a World Cup. In 2023, he joined the North American-based Major League Soccer league, signing on with the Miami franchise despite his age. He's 36. He's brought attention to the league and the soccer community in the United States. And as we are speaking, people are buying tickets to see him play across North America. Roberto Clemente. Well, I told you about Roberto Clemente and the Odd Couple, and that's just a side story that I have. He was born on August 18th, 1934 in Carolina, Puerto Rico. He excelled in athletics as a youngster, and by the age of 17, he was playing for the Santurce. I hope I pronounced that right. Ron Swoboda played there too. You might remember him with the Mets. Crabbers of the Puerto Rican Baseball League. Now, the Brooklyn Dodgers signed him the following year, and by 1954, he was playing for their AAA team in Montreal, and he should have been a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Well, what happened was Walter O'Malley did not like Branch Rickey running the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he fired him. But Branch Rickey had built a farm system, first in St. Louis and then with Brooklyn, and Branch Rickey was the architect of that great, great Brooklyn team that only won one World Championship in 1955. Because they were playing the Yankees virtually every year when they played them. I guess the only years that they weren't there were 1950 and 51 and 54, 57, 58, and that team won in Los Angeles in 59, but he should have been with that team. Whoever replaced Branch Rickey forgot to protect Roberto Clemente, and Rickey took him in the Rule 5 draft for $4,000. And that $4,000 probably the best $4,000 investment the Pittsburgh Pirates organization ever made. It took him a little while. Over the next 5 years, he worked at it. He battled injuries. There was the language barrier in America. Not only was there the language barrier, this is Jim Crow America too. So he's got two things going against him. He's African Caribbean, and although he's from Puerto Rico, so he'd be African American, and also he doesn't speak English. So if you're playing in the South, that is not a recipe for happiness. So yeah, he was an American citizen, but he had no home. That is the 1960 Topps baseball card. Notice he's called Bob. He did not like being called Bob. He wanted to be called Roberto. The only guy who could call him Bob or Bobby was the Pittsburgh Pirates announcer Bob Prince, a character in his own right. A major character in his own right. That was the only guy he really wanted. He accepted being called Bob. He was Roberto Clemente. 1960, he hits his stride. He bats .312. He drives in 94 runs. The Pirates get to the World Series. Pittsburgh defeats the heavily favored New York Yankees in 7 games. It's the Bill Mazeroski home run. He hit .310 during that 7 games to help lead his team to the championship. 11 years later, he's 37 years old, and Clemente leads the Pirates back to the World Series. He hits .414 as a 37-year-old, which is amazing. And he powers Pittsburgh to a second title in 11 years. He was the World Series most valuable player, got his 3,000th hit that year, and then comes the plane crash. He recorded his 3,000 hit late in the 1972 season, 11th player at that time to do that. Clemente and the Pirates won the National League East that year, but lost to the Cincinnati Reds in 5 games in the National League Championship Series. On December 31st, 1972, Clemente boarded a small plane going from Puerto Rico to Nicaragua to assist with earthquake relief. The heavily loaded plane crashed just off the Puerto Rican coast. His body never recovered. He does get into the Baseball Hall of Fame almost immediately. Roberto Clemente Walker, member of an exclusive 3,000 hit club, led National League batting 4 times, had 4 seasons with 200 or more hits while posting a lifetime .317 average, 240 home runs, won the Most Valuable Player Award in 1966. Rifled arm defensive star, set NL National League mark by pacing outfielders in assists 5 years, batted .362 in 2 World Series, hitting in all 14 games. Roberto Clemente, Pittsburgh, 1955 through 1972. He was elected in 1973, a special election that waived the mandatory 5-year waiting rule. He was elected to the Hispanic Heritage Baseball Museum Hall of Fame in 2010, the Caribbean Baseball Hall of Fame 2015, 2003, inducted into the United States Marine Corps Sports Hall of Fame. Marine Corps. He was a Marine. September 1958, he joined the United States Marine Corps Reserve, served his 6 months active duty commitment at Parris Island, South Carolina, Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. It's too bad he isn't around today. You know those commercials about the contaminated water? He could have filed for payment because Camp Lejeune had the contaminated water. Just call this various law firm, but he was a Marine. Jose Altuve just signed a very long-term contract for an old man in baseball, being in his 30s. He's from Venezuela, and he might be the best Hispanic player in the major leagues today. At the age of 16, 2006, he attended a Houston Astros tryout camp in Maracay. The team scouts, though, said, you're too short. You're too short, and we think you've lied about your age, so we're not interested. But he got there. He's listed as the shortest active Major League Baseball player. He's 5'6", and his weight 166 pounds. In 2017, he won the American League Most Valuable Player Award, the Hank Aaron Award, and the 2017 World Series with the Astros. In the same year, he was Sports Illustrated when they were even going downhill at that point. Sports Illustrated is just a shell of its former self. It may not even be in business anymore. We'll see in the next few weeks. Anyway, Sports Illustrated's co-sports person of the year with J.J. Watt of the NFL's Houston Texans for helping to lead relief efforts in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. He is regarded as one of the greatest Houston Astro players in franchise history, which dates back now 62 years. He's considered one of the best second basemen of his generation. Hispanics in baseball. Well, there's a long history here. Luis Miguel Castro was born in Medellin, Colombia. According to Major League Baseball, he was the first Latin American on a Major League roster. He was an infielder who played 42 games with the Philadelphia Athletics in the 1902 season, which may raise some eyebrows considering that the guy who ran the Philadelphia Athletics, Connie Mack, was a Major League racist at best. Didn't want African Americans in his ballpark. Castro played despite the fact that Major League Baseball and the operators of minor league baseball barred non-whites from playing the game at those levels. Minnie Minoso is in baseball's Hall of Fame. In 1949, the Cleveland Indians assigned the black Cuban player Minnie Minoso. He was the first unquestionably black Latin American in the major leagues, though certain Hispanic players with some black blood did play Major League Baseball before Minoso. Well, he, like Clemente, had two obstacles, except Clemente was an American citizen, whereas Minnie wasn't. He was a black man. He didn't speak the language. And you play in the South in those days, that was a major problem. He was one of the star players in the 1950s. Many Latin players have said Minnie was the Latin Jackie Robinson, who broke baseball's color barrier in 1947, becoming the first African American to play in Major League Baseball since Moses Fleetwood Walker did with Toledo in 1884. Minnie showed those players that you can not only make it, but you could become a star. He did a lot to contest the so-called hot-blooded Latin American stereotype of the day, the hot-headed, lose your cool immediately stereotype that baseball had. The Negro Leagues and Mexico. I met Ray Dandridge either 1984 or 1987. He went into baseball's Hall of Fame. That is his business card. It was a flip business card. So you got the front, you got in the back all of his highlights, and then he'll give you an autograph, or he gave me an autograph on the back of that card. Baseball first rose to prominence in the 1880s and now ranks as one of Mexico's most popular sports. Some sources claim that baseball reached Mexican soil because of the U.S. military forces that participated in the U.S.-Mexican War between 1846 and 1848. In the 1930s, when African-American players were barred from playing in any organized baseball league connected with Major League Baseball in America, although there were Negro leagues, African-American players were welcomed with open arms in Mexico and other parts of the Caribbean. Satchel Paige and Cool Papa Bell left the Negro League with many others to play in Mexico. Following World War II, the Pascual brothers tried to start Mexican major leagues. Bob Feller, who is a pitcher with the Cleveland Indians, was on those barn-storming tours. Jorge Pascual ended up with the Club Azul de Veracruz. Pascual signed Satchel Paige in 1938. Pascual also added 3 players who would eventually be enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York: Josh Gibson, Ray Dandridge, and Monty Irvin. And there is Pascual, who Bob Feller told me was kind of the dictator down there. He had a lot of sway, so to speak. Pascual took many of the Negro League's best players, and by 1946, he was rating Major League Baseball. Pasquale, the league president, used suitcases filled with money to lure nearly 2,000 white American players down south, where they played alongside Negro League stars banned from the major leagues because of their skin color. 1946, Pasquale's league became the first professional baseball league to fully integrate since 1884. And major league players did go to Mexico, like Vern Jr. Stevens of the St. Louis Browns, and Sal Maglie, who played with the New York Giants back in the 1950s, and Hal Lanier, whose son, it's Max Lanier, I'm sorry, Max Lanier, whose son Hal Lanier played in Major League Baseball in the 1960s. Mickey Owen, the former Brooklyn Dodgers catcher, and others. They also made a run at Phil Rizzuto, and Rizzuto was telling me that he was getting toward LaGuardia Airport and then turned around and went back to New Jersey and said, "What am I doing? I'm playing for my hometown Yankees. Can't be any better than that." Ted Williams, whose mother was Mexican, Feller and Stan Musial, but the plan ultimately collapsed. Vern Stevens signed a 5-year contract with the Mexican League in 1946. He had been in Mexico only a few days when his father, a former Major League umpire and St. Louis Browns scout Jack Fournier, drove down and brought him back to the United States. Max Lanier, the pitcher, he and others were suspended for going to Mexico from organized baseball for 5 years by the commissioner, Happy Chandler. Lanier and Fred Martin filed suit in federal court maintaining that baseball had violated antitrust laws by depriving them of their livelihood. Danny Gardella, a former New York Giants outfielder who also went to Mexico, filed a similar lawsuit. Faced with the challenge to baseball's contractual structure and also that antitrust suit, which they loved, absolutely loved, they did not want to give that up. Chandler lifted the suspensions in June 1949, and the lawsuits were later dropped. There is Mickey Owen, there is Babe Ruth, there is Jorge Pascual and the Babe collecting some money down in Mexico. They at just making an appearance. This is Bob Feller, and this is an interview I did with Bob Feller, the Cleveland Indians Hall of Fame pitcher, or Cleveland Guardians today. They wanted to get the players who jumped to Mexico back here. Pascual down there, he was a dictator. He and his 4 brothers ran the country. George Pascual, I knew him quite well. Played ball for him in 1947 in October against teams in Mexico. So Happy Chandler and Larry McPhail figured out they had to give the players a pension plan and get the players back. They gave the players who jumped to Mexico amnesty. And there's Pascual in the middle of the Trujillo team down there. He was one of the owners. Satchel Paige's All-Stars was by far the biggest draw of the barnstorming teams. Paige would often tour with Bob Feller's All-Stars or Dizzy Dean's All-Stars. Funny thing about Feller, no pitcher was his equal except for one, Satchel Paige. The reason why? Satchel taught Bob Feller how to make money. Games featuring Satchel Paige's team versus Bob Feller's Major League All-Stars would be sold out in the Major League stadiums all over the United States and Mexico. Satchel Paige had such a presence in barnstorming baseball that he even had his own private plane to fly his team from game to game, something that Bob Feller admired. He really did admire Satch. The Mexican League was officially recognized by Major League Baseball, or organized baseball as it was called in those days, as an official minor league in 1955 with AA status. It was elevated to AAA status in 1968, but none of the teams were affiliated with Major League Baseball teams. Today, the Mexican League has 20 teams. There is a Winter Mexico Baseball League with 10 teams. And there's some scuttlebutt that either Monterrey or Mexico City could be, it won't be, but could be considered for a Major League expansion team. There's Roy Campanella, another guy I met. In fact, I was in his house in White Plains before he moved out west. More than 100 Mexicans have played Major League Baseball. Roy Campanella and Monty Irvin are both in Cooperstown in the Mexican Baseball Hall of Fame. Monty is another guy I knew. He worked for Rheingold Beer, was almost the Mets baseball announcer in 1962, but he was relegated to just some work. He wasn't a regular announcer. Mel Amada is considered the first Mexican baseball player to play in the major leagues, 1933, born in Sonora. During career, it lasted 7 seasons. He was with the Red Sox, Senators, Browns, and Brooklyn Dodgers. Pretty good player. Hit 284, slap hitter, 15 home runs, drove in 360 runs, and is in the Mexican Baseball Hall of Fame, inducted in 1971. It's my buddy Jose Valdiviso. Jose and I spent a lot of nights together covering baseball back in the 1980s. He was the sports announcer with Channel 47, WNJU, over in Linden, Newark, New Jersey, and a wonderful guy, and the guy who, like I said, I spent many a night with, and he was from Cuba. And I introduced him to my wife one night and said, here's the deal with Jose. He's a great guy, but you might not want to talk to him about Fidel Castro. She said, why? She did, and you're going to find out why in a second. Clark Griffiths, Washington Senators franchise signed Cuban players. The players were good, but more importantly, they were cheap. You could get them for 10 cents on a dollar. The scout Joe Cambria found the players. Cambria and Griffith led the way in bringing Cuban players to the major leagues during the 1940s and 50s. Of 51 Cuban-born players to make their major league debuts between 1933 and 1956, which would include Valdiviso, 32 of them did with the Senators, before Roberto Estella debuted with the Senators on September 7th, 1935. Only 19 Cubans had played in the major leagues since 1871. Cambria is credited with signing as many as 400 Cubans for Washington, but Cambria got their signatures on contracts at rock bottom prices. Dominican players. Let me get back to Jose Valdiviso. So Valdiviso and I were talking about Fidel Castro one day, and the whole thing about, well, history could have been changed if Castro did sign a contract, which he might have with the Washington Senators, because as Valdiviso said, any kid with a baseball club got a tryout, and to get a tryout, you have to sign a contract that if you get hurt, we're not responsible. So he said, Castro did try out, but he said he was a rotten pitcher. Terrible pitcher. He had no baseball abilities at all. And that story about him, history could have been changed if he signed. He said he had no ability. He had zero ability, and that was the end of that story. But Valdiviso could not go home to visit his parents, and it was just horrible for him, and he hated Castro. These are the Alou brothers. Jesus Alou on the left, Matty Alou at center, and Felipe, who I knew actually, on the right. I knew him as the manager of the Montreal Expos. Dominican players made the major leagues in the 1950s. Ozzie Virgil, an infielder with the New York Giants, was the first Dominican in the major leagues, starting in 1956, followed by Felipe Alou in 1958 with the same team, different city, San Francisco. He's the second. The first Dominican star, pitcher Juan Marichal, whose nickname was the Dominican Dandy, made his debut in 1960, also with the Giants. Alou's two brothers, Matty Alou, and Jesus, also played with the Giants. On September 15, 1963, the three Alou brothers played together in the outfield in a game against Pittsburgh, a baseball first. Fernando Mania, as Vin Scully would say, Fernando Mania, the Dodger announcer. It started April 9th, 1981. He debuted for the Los Angeles Dodgers in 1980, excelled in 1981. In the 1981 strike-shortened season, Fernando became the first player ever to win the Rookie of the Year and Cy Young Awards same season. His team won the World Series. Fernando had become a cultural icon in both Los Angeles and his native Mexico. 11 of Fernando's 12 starts at Dodger Stadium, 1981, the strike-shortened season, sellouts. On the road during his first 2 years, Valenzuela's starts drew 13,000 more people. than other Dodger starters. And there he is, Fernando Valenzuela. He became the most important Mexican player in Major League Baseball history, uh, but not the only notable one. Bobby Avila with the Cleveland Indians won the American League batting title in 1954. Fernando turned so many people from Mexico, Central America, and South America into fans. He created interest in baseball among people who did not care about baseball. He pitched for 11 seasons with Los Angeles. It was his first few years when he was baseball's biggest star before his arm went. Pancho Villa. Oh, wait, what's he doing here? Okay. In 1914, he wished to add to his war chest. He sought to stage a world title fight in Juarez between Jack Johnson and Jess Willard. Johnson, the first African-American heavyweight champion, lived and self-exiled after a racially motivated jury convicted him of violating the Mann Act. The Mann Act came about in 1910. He liked white women. He didn't, and he was also the world champion. They were looking for the Great White Hope, so he was arrested because he transported women over state lines, which is still a law in the country, for immoral purposes. I would think that a lot of men could be charged with the Mann Act. He was charged. Chuck Berry was charged. Charlie Chaplin was charged. Because of his conviction, Johnson could not travel to the Mexican border town through the United States because Villa's foe, Carrizanza, controlled the Mexican coastlines. Promoters moved the fight from Juarez to Cuba. During his exile, Johnson lived and boxed across Latin America until the Mexican government welcomed him as a guest in 1919. He lived in Mexico until 1920 when revolutionary violence forced him to surrender to United States authorities. There's boxing. That hangs in my basement. It's got Muhammad Ali autograph on there, among others. By the 1960s, the influence of Mexican boxing expanded not only to the United States, but globally. In the later months of 1963, representatives intent on reforming and unifying the sport from Latin America, Asia, Europe, and the United States attended a boxing convention in Mexico City. Out of this convention came the World Boxing Council, boxing's first global sanctioning body, and you could see that was the 20th anniversary, and my father-in-law actually got that from me because I was working, talking to people. Julio Cesar Chavez is a boxing hero from Mexico. He epitomized Mexican machismo. He's a macho man. The so-called Mexican style of boxing, which emphasized offensive aggression while paying only minimal attention to defense. That didn't originate with him, but in modern times, he's associated with it and remains a national hero in Mexico. Guillermo Vilas, tennis player, one of the great South American tennis players during the 1970s, is playing against and defeating Bjorn Borg, Jimmy Connors, Elaine Nastase, Arthur Ashe, the greats of that era. Won the 1977 U.S. Open, defeating Jimmy Connors, one of the most popular players on the tour. He captured 62 ATP championships, 4 major titles, the Australian in 1978, French and 79, French and U.S. Opens in 77, retired in 1989, inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame, 1991. Maria Bueno of Brazil. She was Latin America's most successful tennis player. She was the world's top women's player. She won 19 Grand Slams, 3 Wimbledon crowns. She was dominant during a 10-year run starting in 1958. She once claimed she was a totally instinctive player. The moment I have to think about my tennis, I cannot play. Sounds like Yogi Berra, who once said, you can't hit and think at the same time. 2015, the Brazilian Olympic Tennis Stadium was named after her. Mexico City, 1968. Dr. Tommy Smith originally advocated the boycott of the 1968 Mexico City Olympics. His reasons? South Africa and Rhodesia should be uninvited from the Olympics. The restoration of Muhammad Ali's world heavyweight boxing title, taken away from him when he was stripped of his boxing license in New York, and the boxing council stripped him of his title, both without due diligence. Avery Brundage stepped down as president of the International Olympic Committee. Avery Brundage was a racist and anti-Semite, and the hiring of more African American assistant coaches. The protests following the 100-meter race that they had participated in had been something the two medal-winning athletes carefully planned. As gold medal winner Smith and the bronze winner John Carlos walked to the podium, they took off their shoes to protest poverty. They wore beads and a scarf to protest lynchings. And when the national anthem was played, they lowered their heads in defiance and raised their fists in a Black Power salute. And that is the famous picture, or one of the famous pictures from the 1968 Mexico Summer Olympics, October of 68. Dr. Tommy Smith is friends with my wife's cousin, who went to Oberlin College, where he taught. My wife's cousin played football there and ran track and field, and Tommy Smith was his coach. I don't like the idea of people looking at it as negative. There was nothing but a raised fist in the air and a bowed head acknowledging the American flag, not symbolizing a hatred for it. Carlos, who worked as a guidance counselor at Palm Springs High School in California, told the Guardian newspaper, had a moral obligation to step up. Morality was a far greater force than the rules and regulations they had. On his left breast, the Australian Peter Norman wore a small badge that read Olympic Project for Human Rights, an organization set up previously to oppose racism in sports. Norman suggested that Carlos and Smith split their gloves. One of them was wearing gloves. Norman asked a member of the United States rowing team if he could borrow a badge that read Olympic Project for Human Rights, a project set up to oppose racism in sports. Tommy Smith ended up playing in the American Football League the year before the National Football League merged with the American Football League, or took the teams in as one. Smith and Carlos played in the AFL and the NFL. Smith played a season with Paul Brown's Cincinnati Bengals. Carlos 1 year with the Philadelphia Eagles, 1 year in the Canadian Football League, and nobody cared. Nobody cared about their protests, unlike Colin Kaepernick. Smith and Carlos kept their medals. They were never asked to return to the International Olympic Committee, or return the medals to the International Olympic Committee. Peter Norman, the Australian, suffered the most. He went back to Australia, qualified for the 1972 team because he helped the protest, was not allowed on the team. He was treated really as a non-citizen, and died in 2006. Smith and Carlos were among his pallbearers. In 2012, Australia apologized to Norman for treating him poorly. Lee Trevino won 6 major golf championships, including 2 U.S. Open titles, consecutive triumphs at both the Open Championship and the PGA Championship. He was known for his unconventional swing, his charismatic personality. I met him a couple of times. He had a great sense of humor. The Merry Mex was a fan favorite throughout his illustrious career. Nancy Lopez was a great golfer in 1977. She is the most accomplished Latina golfer of all time. She won 48 LPGA Tour victories, or she had 48 Tour victories, including 3 major championships. Carmelo Anthony, maybe the most famous or the best Latino basketball player of all time. He was a 10-time NBA All-Star. He's never part of an NBA championship team, which hurts his legacy because in today's game, everybody's measured up against LeBron. Well, actually, Michael Jordan, he won 6 championships. Bill Russell won 11 championships. But as my old buddy Bert Sugar, who some of you might remember, the boxing announcer, baseball historian, once said, if it didn't happen on ESPN, it didn't happen. And ESPN started in 1976, and Russell's salad years were the 50s and 60s. He was part of 3 American gold-winning Olympic teams, along with an American group that won a bronze medal. Member of Syracuse University's National Collegiate Athletic Association's National Championship 2003. Pau Gasol is thought to be the most accomplished Spanish player in NBA history. He was part of the Spanish national teams that were rivals to Team USA at Beijing 2008, London 2012, and the Rio Games in 2016. He was on the Spanish squad that won 2 silver medals and a bronze medal. While in the NBA, he had 20,894 points, grabbed 11,305 rebounds. That is Rebecca Lobo, one of the early stars of the Women's National Basketball Association, Cuban American basketball player, part of the NCAA Women's National Championship squad with the University of Connecticut 1995. She and her American teammates won a gold medal in 1996 Atlanta Olympics, and she was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 2017. Dana Torres, one of the most successful female Olympians of all time. She won 12 medals throughout her career. 16 years ago, 2008, at the age of 41, she became the oldest swimmer to make a U.S. Olympic team. Torres was the first swimmer to represent the United States in 5 Olympic Games, 84, 88, 92, 2000, 2008. She worked as a model, first elite swimmer to model swimsuit in the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. I guess I'll still put that out. That'll make money for them. Nothing else does. Appearing in the 1994 edition, she also was inducted into the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame in 2005. Next stop, Mexico City. The NBA has played 32 games in Mexico City since 1992. Major League Baseball regular season games will return to Mexico City on April 27th and 28th, 2024, with the Houston Astros playing the Colorado Rockies, the 7th series played in Mexico. NFL Football Americano is taking a break from Mexico City until stadium renovations are complete for the 2026 World Cup. That's why the stadium's closed. The NFL markets its product heavily in Mexico. The National Hockey League is exploring the possibility of playing a regular season game in Mexico and also trying to make inroads in Mexico with hockey. That's going to be very difficult without rinks. There are very few hockey rinks in Mexico. The World Cup 2026 will be played in Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. 2017, there was a joint bid to share FIFA's World Cup men's tournament 3 ways, U.S., Mexico, and Canada, and that defeated a proposal from Morocco to win the right to host FIFA's International Soccer Showcase. That will be the next time a Hispanic country will be in the global spotlight for a major sports tournament. Well, thank you so much for listening to me. Any questions, any comments? The floor is yours.
This is Anna. I was not aware of many of these people that you mentioned, which is amazing to me. And you brought back history, about Smith and Carlos. That was such a time period when so many people concentrated on what they did and made them appear like if they had done something horrible instead of the reason behind what they were doing. So it's really amazing how I kind of forgot about some of these things,
Well,
that
this
you
is
brought
the
up.
tip. This
Yeah,
is only the tip of the iceberg.
yeah.
And these are
It's
some of
it's
the people I knew too.
yeah.
Jose Valdivieso had stories about Castro and his family, and yeah, he was telling me about other Major League Baseball players like Tony Oliva and Tony Perez who could not go home. They just
Mm,
couldn't go home, and they couldn't see their families, and they couldn't send money back for the families, and I think that Oliva and Cookie Rojas, Oliva and Tony Perez were the last 3 Cubans that got out of Cuba prior to Castro, and there were some
mhm.
Cubans that came in that were part of flotillas that when Castro released people over the years. But I think those are the last 3 guys prior to him taking over that actually got into Major League Baseball, and Tony Perez is in the Hall of Fame, so he was pretty good.
Amazing. Any other comments?
I just
Rhonda
think
said
it's
thank you.